if anybody who follows Formula One, think of the marketer or the CMO as being the driver, the one who sits in the car. But without the pit crew, you need creative teams, you need data scientists, you need people with financial acumen, you need CX strategists, you need product experts. So that's your pit crew, right? Team boss, the CEO, the team principal. Without all of these things working in conjunction, the car goes nowhere. If you look at one of the most successful drivers in Formula One was a gentleman by the name of Michael Schumacher. What made Michael Schumacher great wasn't just the fact that he was a great driver. He spent hours of his time before and after the race with his engineers, just refining every single element of the car. And good marketers need to be able to do that. The car is your brand. That's what people see going around the track. That's what people buy.
Akhil, I wanted to kick off our conversation with a bit of your backstory, because when I went through your background, it was an interesting mix that I saw, because I think you started off very early with Virgin Records, which is really around what we now talk about content marketing. But I think you started very early with content marketing, and then you were in HR for some time, and then you moved to market research, and then you moved to insurance marketing and BFSI, or financial services marketing. So it's an interesting background. So where did this interest to build a career in marketing start? And can you tell us a little bit about who are your heroes and what's the kind of inspiration that you got from them?
Wow. So I think probably for someone who would like to kind of understand what I do, if I had to kind of describe my career or my role in a single sentence, I'd say it's been about decoding human behavior and using that understanding to kind of build brands that people actually care about. When I worked in the music business in Virgin Records, and this is a couple of decades ago, that was my first job. The product that you were selling was the artist and their music, right? And you had to get people to care about that enough that they would go out into a store and buy a CD or a cassette tape, right? And that became really the product that you sold. And to understand that, really, you'd have to to be able to find an artist that was marketable. You had to know, really what was it that, what were the tastes and preferences that consumers had? What was trendy? What was, what was the in thing? Music, entertainment. These are fields which have to be very much on the pulse of the consumer. And that was probably my first sense, really, moving from someone who was just like a listener coming out of college into actually the marketing of a product, music as a product and artists as a product. And then understanding that, okay, fine, there is an entire industry that focuses a lot on understanding what is relevant to the consumer, what sounds, what trends, what music. How can you package an artist? How can you take someone who's got a lot of raw talent, right, and package them in such a way so that they can actually be, a very saleable product. Right? So to me, really, that's where marketing kind of that was like kind of gave me my first love or piqued my real interest in the field of marketing. The fact that it's not just about having a product, right? It's about understanding people at the end of the day, because people buy brands, and brands are things that people care about. So if you're able to get people to care about something, then they're much more interested in having a relationship with you. So really, I think that's what the job of all marketers are. I think over the course of that entire period, I would say I worked across several jobs. Some big, some in some very well-known brands, others in very small startups. But I've had the opportunity to kind of work across the banking and financial services industry. I've worked with e-commerce. I've worked with FMCG, with OTT, some tech clients. And each of these kind of experiences has kind of always reinforced what I believe is a fundamental truth. It's that marketing isn't about selling, right? It's about making people believe. And really that's where I feel that I find the most passion, I have the most passion, where I have the most joy, right? In kind of taking something and saying, okay, fine, how do I get people to believe in what it is that I'm pitching?
So when I look at your experience, I picked up three areas which I thought, if you can really dig deep and understand and learn what you learned, that will be a good starting point. So I'm going to pick up three areas that I found very, very differentiated from many CMOs that I have seen. Okay. The first one is the work you did in Cantor, okay, where you built something called predictive content intelligence, okay, where what you really did there was, I think, you started looking at different content. You started looking at which content works for what context, and there's a lot of work that you did around the predictive content intelligence. So can you talk a little bit about what was predictive content intelligence? Because today content marketing is at the core of what many marketers have to do, and that's something that probably you did. So is that something that you can
Yeah,
talk
so I
about?
think the idea was we were not so when we talk predictive, at least in today's language, really, I think the implication is that this is what's going to be big, right? In the future. But I think content and the way that people consume content the channels have changed, so the media has changed over time, but tastes and preferences remain relatively fixed. I think by the time if I take the music business, for example, we used to see that people would buy certain genre, would tend to prefer certain genres of music. If you listen to a lot of classical music, that makes up the bulk of your library. You might have some jazz, you might have some blues, but classical music is your mainstay. If you buy pop and rock music, most of the artists that you follow really are around pop and rock, though you might have a little bit of other influences as well. So when it comes to content, really, over time, the preferences generally tend to get fixed with a little bit of variation here and there. What we were trying to do with content was really try to figure out that you have this entire medium called digital. It's allowing you to identify consumers by different demographics, by location, by what websites they visit. Could we anticipate what type of content would actually be relevant to them? Because on the internet, you don't know who is on the other end. Right? You don't have a person that you're speaking to.
Okay.
And really, what we were trying to do was trying to understand patterns. Right? People who use certain apps, people who visit certain websites, who read certain types of articles, what sort of content do they gravitate towards, and how could that information be very useful to brands? Right? So, for example, let's say I work in the financial services industry. If I have a person who is, say, a type A person, right? That person needs to look at a lot of statistics, right? Likes to do a lot of in-depth research, likes to do a lot of comparisons, right? That kind of person will respond much better to information that is probably given to him in a tabulated format that shows very clear pros and cons, that has what we call in the industry a give-get. You give this much, this is what you get, this is how much you get in return, right? And that's one type of content for that kind of individual or consumer, right? But let's say I've got now person is type B. This is a type B consumer. Type B consumer is someone who doesn't really want to get into too much detail. They prefer their content to be shared with them maybe through a short shareable video. They're not looking for depth of information. But they are attracted to a lot of visual storytelling, right? So for that kind of consumer, really, how do you identify that this is the kind of consumer that you're dealing with, and therefore figure out how to translate that same message, right, in such a way so that it actually brings out all of the relevant information that they want, right? So type B person may want a reel, they may respond to infographics, but the minute you give them an article, right, even if it's extremely well written, if it goes over 150 words, they're never going to touch it. Right? And as marketers today, really, we have all of these different types of content that we can use that are at our disposal, but we really need to be able to understand what content to develop for whom and when to pitch it to them. Right? So, if I have to take a different category, say a category like shampoo, everybody uses shampoo, right? For you take two young women, let's say they're both in between the age range of 20 to 30, right? So let's say early 20s, they're first jobbers, right? And now they're just kind of starting off their career. And they're looking for products that will help with hair care, right? And shampoo happens to be one of those things. Now, when you're in college and when you're moving into the workplace, you're all of a sudden there's a shift in in the way that the world perceives you and you perceive yourself. Right, so all of a sudden, wardrobes change, personal habits, the ones that you want to project to the outside world, those change, and especially for women and their hair, right? Maybe I have short hair, so I'm just looking for something that has to kind of make the hair look very formal. But if I have long hair, how do I kind of manage that in the workplace? Do I tie it up? If I have curly hair, if I have straight hair, really, what kind of product is actually going to work best for me? Now, in that sense, one person might be saying, okay, fine, for me, I'm just looking for something that keeps my hair clean, presentable, and that's it. So I'm looking for something fairly functional. But for another person, they may be like, hey, listen, my hair is really curly, right? And it tends to not react well into an AC environment, right? So then in that case, I need a different kind of product. I need something that will work specifically for me. The content that she's looking for is very different. Right. So in that sense, the idea of predictive content was simply coming back to the original point of understanding who that consumer was, understanding what was relevant to them, figuring out which format they prefer to view that content. Is it a video? Is it an infographic? Is it a customer testimonial? Is it an influencer? And then helping brands kind of double down on those pieces of content so the content is able to work hard. I think what happens is today as marketers, we are very confused. We have this plethora of information. We have so much data saying this content works, this content works, this content doesn't work. Therefore, this is what we need to do. And actually, you need to figure out who your consumer is and choose the content that's right for them. So
Beautiful. So clearly, it was like a matrix that you would say, here is a persona. This persona for this category consumes this kind of content, and therefore, if I am a marketer or a brand, what kind of content can I really, build as a content engine is really what I think you are talking about in the predictive content intelligence
Absolutely.
work that you did, right? So, how did that learning help you when you became a CMO?
So I think for me, really, it wasn't just that learning. It was more a reinforcement of things that we had kind of come across with over the course of my career. I think when you're building a marketing career, really, it's about always having. If you want to be successful, you have to have it always first of all boils down to a deep understanding of the customer, having a good understanding of your business, and then really trying to figure out where that intersection is going to be, right? And for us, it was not just about content, but it was more about understanding, consumer behavior. So today, when I think about my current role, right, I lead marketing for a brand that has seen one of the biggest transformations in the insurance space. Right, so
Yeah.
we used to be known by another name. We've been known by another name since 2008, and in 2024, when Bandhan Financial Holdings acquired us, it came with the challenge of kind of repositioning what was a relatively well-established name into something that actually now fit within the a larger financial services ecosystem of the Bandhan Group. So for us, this was a lot more than just a changing of a logo or the changing of a tagline, right? It was about building credibility, building trust, and building long-term equity in a sector like in life insurance where there is a bit of skepticism, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, the challenge really was how do you position yourself not just as another private insurer, right? Going back to Bandhan's own roots, right? About access, about inclusion, about financial security, and saying, okay, fine, how do we position ourselves in light of this in a way that's still relevant to the end customer? Right? And that kind of
Great.
helped, having that understanding kind of helped us give us a positioning where we are today. So for example, today you see Bandhan Life Communication, where we're really all about making insurance more accessible. Accessible for whom? Accessible for the self-employed, accessible for middle class Indians, accessible for women, right? Really, those are the kind of focus areas that we kind of double down on. That's because of the fact that yes, it has to be, like I said, an understanding of who you are as a business, where your customer is, and where those two things could potentially intersect.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think I'm going to pick up the second strand of work that you did, which is to me very early in your career, which is you probably ran one of the largest e-commerce panels, right? And when e-commerce, I don't think was even, I would say it was just at its infancy stage, and you are building an understanding of e-commerce audience. So, can you talk to us about setting up the panel, the learnings that you had, and some of the insights that actually surprised you? Because you seem to come across as somebody who wants to understand the human behavior, a very strong understanding of how you buy things. And I thought this whole e-commerce panel was a very interesting play of understanding shopping moving offline to online, right? And again, when I look at your LinkedIn profile, I see a banner which says digital first, right? That's really what I see there. And therefore, some of the nuances probably picked up from there. So therefore, what did those experiences teach you when you did those panels, and what was interesting insight that you still remember?
So, and now that you mentioned, I think I need to relook at that description, because yes, it does say building digital first brands, but I think at the end of the day, for any brand to be successful, you need to be customer first or consumer first. Really, those are the brands that are successful. So it's a good thing you pointed that out, because I may have to go back and just review that. But yeah, I think by the time we started working on e-commerce, actually e-commerce had been, so we're talking between the period of about 2015 to 2020. So e-commerce in India had already, kind of been established. It was not at the size that it is today, but it had definitely, been around for a few years. Probably I think I think the lessons that led up to us setting up the panel really that were crucial for me was that when I first started, post Virgin, I'd spent some time abroad. I came back to India. This is around 2008, and at that point, I really kind of stumbled into this thing called digital marketing, right, which was very new for us at that point in time, and things had just kind of begun to get interesting. Google had acquired YouTube at that point. The iPhone had just come out. Brands were still kind of debating whether social media was a passing fad. And at that point, really, I was fortunate that I had worked at companies that had encouraged experimentation. when I'm talking about experimentation, I mean, where can you combine behavioral science with business metrics to understand not just what custom consumers were doing, but really why are they doing it? And for us, really, when I moved to Kantar, and we had this idea of setting up like a digital shopper panel, it was more an extension of that. Because one of the challenges that we saw and we identified is that there was a lack of information to brands that were trying to understand the e-commerce landscape. Right? So when you think of how e-commerce in India started, you started with books, right? And then you moved into consumer electronics like mobile phones and apparel, fashion, and those are categories that kind of really grew out. And for the platforms, the online platforms like the Flipkarts and the Amazons and the Mintras, which are really trailblazing in India, they understood, they had access to a lot of data, right? But for brands that were actually selling on those platforms, right, their understanding was limited to the category that they were selling in. And for us, we said, at the end of the day, you're selling to an individual, or an individual is making that choice. How can we better help you understand this individual better? And that was the idea that we had. Now, if you look at the way that traditional consumer research is done, especially around shopper panels, it's a very physical face-to-face sort of interaction. So it's not uncommon even today in India. Some of the largest, most well-established panels will require a person from the company that does the recording and the tabulation, visiting an individual's household, doing an inventory of all of the items that are there in their household, looking at the bills to figure out where they purchased from, making a record of that in a diary, and then reporting that back. And I think that works well still for a lot of categories, especially household consumption categories. So you don't often change your brand over rice, dal, atta, salt, things like that. So your staples pretty much remains fixed. It helps when you're trying to understand changes in market share from one region to another, whether a new product is penetrating into a category. But we realized e-commerce was moving much, much faster than that. Right? There was consumers were experimenting from one platform. A new platform was at some point seemingly launched, every other month, and depending on where platforms, they typically start in one particular area, and then they kind of bloom out into the rest of the country. So platforms are very strong in some markets, but not so strong in others. And for a brand to kind of figure out really where do I focus my attention, really that's where information or data became useful to them. And so the idea of the e-com shopper panel was that we knew everybody who was buying anything online, right, would get an online receipt, right? And what we did was we recruited like a large number of shoppers, I think about 60,000 people, which when you think of the entire size of India's population, 60,000 might seem very small, but 60,000 is very sizable if you're able to make sure your panel is representative, right?
Of the population.
Representative of that population that actually shops online. So we were able to recruit, fairly large number of people and get them to share all of their online receipts for us. And we worked with our tech teams to kind of do it and to automate the technology so it never became a physical transaction. So if Akhil was buying something off of Amazon or Flipkart or any other platform, I didn't have to forward it, right, back to the partner that we were working with. It was simply done automatically. So it was never a question of, I've forgotten one receipt and here's the other receipt. So what this helped us figure out is really how fast the category was growing, which markets it was growing in, how often people experimented, right? Because sometimes you will a new category is launched, there's a lot of advertising or promotion around it, and you may want to experiment with it, but then it depends on what SKU is available, right? Say something like groceries, right? What kind of today we're in the age of a Zepto and a Blinkit, where everything comes in 10 minutes, and we're used to that, especially in the large cities, right? But at that point, really the idea of of buying groceries online, when I could go downstairs to the Kirana store and do the same thing, okay, was a significant shift, So we would see customers kind of experimenting with that, and we would see when they would we were able to identify when habits became sticky, right? So we know that this person is more likely to be a repeat customer, and when habits would be not so sticky. So then they would, say, instead of, they might still buy the category every month, but they might buy online only once in a quarter.
It's more a flippant shopping behavior. Some will be a flippant shopping behavior for a certain category. Some would be a sticky purchase behavior for a certain category.
In fact, it
right?
was not so much that it was flippant. It was more a question of convenience. Maybe I'm trying to buy, an SKU of, let's say it's summer vacations, right? It's summer vacations. A lot of families visit each other, cousins go and visit each other. So imagine you've got this household, nuclear family, but all of a sudden during the summer vacations, you've got a whole bunch of cousins who are visiting, and they're all kids, right? And you have these ranging between the ages of 6 to 12. Each of them is coming in, and they want cereal. One person wants chocos, one person wants, a different flavor. One person wants, this regular cereal. All of a sudden, now if you go down to the local kirana store, they might not stock everything that you want. Right. So how does how does the person in the household kind of make that decision? It's like, okay, fine. I know people are coming in. I want to stock up before these kids come in. Kids are always hungry. It's summer vacation. They're going to be playing around all the time. They might want a snack. Let me figure out where I can get all of all of the different things without having to scour the city. Go online, do that shopping, and all of a sudden you've got all those different flavors of cereal sitting in your kitchen, right, ready for when the customer comes in. But that's something that's only required at that point. It's convenience, right? The other thing is when it becomes more sticky, when it becomes habitual. Say you consume cereal on a regular basis. Now you have a separate cereal for the wife or the husband. Maybe they consume Special K because it's more calorie conscious. But the child loves the cereal with fruits and berries and different flavors, and they don't always stick to the same cereal. So maybe on Monday to Friday they want a standard cereal, but Saturday, Sunday is for chocos, right? That's the weekend cereal that they get to have, right? So then you will find this consumption happening on both ends. So that's when you see that those sticky behaviors kind of creeping in. So we were able to kind of identify things like this, not just on cereal, but across all categories, because as people kind of shop more, we would kind of see where that shift was happening. And it would allow us to kind of figure out what habits were creating that stickiness and what habits were not.
So you were able to build out personas, different cities behaving differently, different kinds of households, having different e-shopping patterns. So it's almost like a shopper marketing equivalent, but you're doing it on a e-commerce audience, right? That's really probably the early phases of how you went out and built the
So this was really early days for us. I think today the kind of data that's available is very different. Like I said, we're talking about 10 years ago. So the landscape was different, but at that point, it was very interesting information to have. And really for us, it was about understanding what is driving that decision. Because data tells you one thing. Data tells you why people are buying. It doesn't necessarily tell you why they are buying it. Right? And for us, it was about being able to marry both. Right? How can I figure out not just what the consumption pattern is, but what's influencing that consumption pattern?
So when I look at your experience, I see content, then the predictive content intelligence, then you're actually doing a bit of research around e-commerce and understanding the audience, and then you also did a mobile audience panel, right? Which is again something which is very interesting, which is to actually look at, so you got mobile, you got e-commerce, you got content. Suddenly your ability to look at data, to look at digital across multiple devices is something that you would have instinctively picked up. Maybe you don't see it this way, but I think if you're able to build in then bring in the nuances, right? If you're able to bring in the nuances, then you then start applying it in any business, right? So do you think it's important for a marketing professional to have a fairly important view of all of these capabilities, at least in some depth, so that when they start moving from one level to another, it gives them the perspective. Do you think it's important?
So, if you think about what's important to marketers today, okay, and you compare it to what was, say, the past, I think marketing always has been about creativity and storytelling, right? And I think good marketing or successful marketing will continue to be about creativity and storytelling. But it's also important for marketers to realize that, what got you to this point today is not necessarily enough to get you to where you want to be. So as marketers, really, we need to kind of, uh, expand our own portfolio of understanding, right? A marketer today who doesn't understand analytics or behavioral science or even financial metrics, is kind of setting themselves up for irrelevance. I think today, to be a successful marketer, there are a few things you need to be good at, and if you're not good at them, really start kind of building up your expertise in at least one of these areas, so that you become a better marketer. First thing is pattern recognition, right? I think the best marketers are the ones who are able to spot cultural shifts before they actually go mainstream. Think about when the iPhone was first launched. Right? When the iPhone was first launched, people say that the iPhone killed Nokia, or the iPhone killed BlackBerry. The iPhone actually killed four companies, right? There was Nokia, there was BlackBerry, there was Motorola, and I believe there was Qualcomm. So there were four companies that kind of just eventually were killed by the fact that the iPhone was launched. But there was another company that was actually able to spot like a fundamental shift that would come because of the launch of the iPhone that wasn't even in the handset business, right? And they were able to they were able to kind of be predictive about where it wanted to go, and then today they're an incredibly successful company, right? This company did not even have a mobile operating system. That company was Google. Their business was search, right? And it still continues to be search and advertising. But in 2007, I think when the iPhone was launched, I think very soon after that, if you go back and read the case studies, it's really about how Google responded at that point in time. They realized very early on that there would be a switch from the World Wide Web to apps, especially mobile. And they were able to predict this shift. And what did they do as a result? They went out and identified someone who had a very strong mobile operating system, which was called Android, that they acquired. And think of this, Google doesn't make smartphones, it's not their core business. Yes, they have a Pixel today, but what percentage of Pixels is Google's entire business? It's very small. But they were able to identify that this was a shift that consumers were going to undertake. They acquired a mobile operating system, and they built their entire business using Android today. Android is given away for free, essentially, right? But why is it given away for free? Because it helps Google understand the customer better, so they can serve better, more relevant ads. So at the end of the day, Android is just a means to an end to kind of make for Google to maintain their superiority on digital advertising and search. You can't open a mobile phone device and not see the Google search bar or the Google or the YouTube app, right? So pattern recognition becomes something that becomes very critical. The second thing I think that marketers need to start getting comfortable with, if they're not already comfortable with, is just this mindset of agility. I think marketers love to work off of a playbook, right? But all playbooks, especially now, have an expiration date, right? So you need to be able to test, to iterate, and to pivot quickly. You can't be stuck to a rigid 12-month plan or a 24-month plan and say, this is what I'm going to do because this is what the plan says, right? You need that element of agility, right? And The third thing I think that all marketers should strive for is, just an understanding of the business, the commercial acumen. If you can't articulate what is the cost of acquisition, what is the long-term value, what is the ROI, right? You're going to struggle as a marketer as you grow in your career to kind of justify marketing investments, especially when you're talking to leadership or to boards at some point. So these are kind of three things. You need to be able to kind of trend spot, look at patterns, be able to judge when the shift is going to happen. That comes from people watching and listening to consumers. You need to be agile, so that means being a little bit flexible in your mindset, not being too rigid, right? But I don't mean throw the baby out of the bathwater every time there's a new fad. Look at it. Really understand what is the implication it can have for your business, and then if you think it's going to be significant, work towards it, right? So build that agility in. 3 is understand your business, have that commercial acumen so that you can understand really what investments you're making within marketing, how it's actually going to benefit the business. Right? Yeah, I think probably the one thing that marketers, the really good marketers or successful marketers have been able to do that is very underrated is what I call behavior shaping. Okay, if you think about it, really good marketers, they don't just sell a product, they're actually able to shift a consumer's habits. A product like shampoo, okay? Shampoo was not a daily use product. If you go back in time, my mother's generation, when she was very young, right? Her mother's generation, shampoo was not a daily use product in India, right? It wasn't until brands actually invested in habit formation through marketing that it became something that became much more daily use. Today, you can't think
Yeah.
of, at least the in most modern households, you will see 1, 2, possibly more bottles of shampoo, right, over there. Maybe one for the gentleman in the house, one for the lady, one for the kids, whatever. But I'm saying it's considered pretty much an essential, priority. But
Yeah. No, in fact, the behavior shaping when you talk about is moving from traditional blocks of soap to shower gels is a very interesting trend spotting and habit forming that I can see today. Because when I look at the supermarket shelves, at least 10 years back, I didn't see so much of shower gels. It was a premium category. But today, I see a big shift in shower gels being there. So you are very right. The core capability of a marketer is how does one build habits, and what are the things that you're going to do to build habits in the society and with the consumers that you are targeting. I think that's really a very
absolutely. I
interesting
think if
take.
you just say, I think a lot of people who would be watching this podcast are familiar with e-commerce, right? But e-commerce wasn't even mainstream in India until marketers kind of started introducing features like, a cash on delivery or free returns. These were things that kind of removed friction, that stopped people from experimenting with the category. And really, that's how they were able to start creating those habits. So habit formation is not something that happens overnight. It takes a lot of time, patience, investment. But when it's done right, you can really create entirely new categories. So the marketers, I believe, who can kind of shift that consumer behavior will be much more successful than the ones who don't.
So you've gone through transformation phase is something that you spoke about, which is moving from one brand to rebranding yourself into another company. So when you really look at this kind of a transition, what are the ways in which you approach the problem? Because the consumer has seen you as a brand which is earlier a very different brand. Now it's a new brand that they're going to be dealing with. And for example, I saw your settlement ratios, it is at 99.66%. Okay. So therefore, the transition of one brand to another, how have you looked at that?
So for us, I think the challenge really was that how can you kind of reposition yourself from a name that had kind of been around for some time into a completely different name. I think what helped for us in our case was the fact that Bandhan as a name had kind of was had been established, has been around for some time, especially in the eastern part of India, which is where it was very strong. Um, but for us is I think the other way that we were trying to look for it is that you have 23, 24 life insurers in India. Okay, what is the space that you want to occupy? At the core of it, really, the product that we're selling is fundamentally the same. So where is how do you make yourself more distinct? And for us, it was going back to our roots and figuring out, okay, what is it that we stand for? Bandhan as a brand stands for access, for inclusion, for financial security. And in an industry where most brands are fighting for the same high income, salaried customer, we saw an opportunity at that point to do something different, right? To make insurance more accessible, especially for those who don't have easy access to insurance. Which is, so when I say self-employed, I want to maybe give people some context about why even self-employed. If you look at India's working population today, right, 3 out of 5, working class people today are self-employed. Another 20% are what we would call casual labor. That leaves only 1 out of 5 people today who are actually what we would call the salaried class. Right? So that means there's a huge chunk of the population today who is underserved. Right? And they're underserved why? Because they don't necessarily have, as private insurers, we have tended to prefer the salaried class simply because they have all of the paperwork that's necessary for us to kind of make it to make a decision about selling them a long-term product like life insurance. It's an easier pitch, and the company really understands much better the profile of the person that they are buying from. And for us, we said we have 22 other players who are fighting for this market, right? Why don't we look at really where the need is? India today has a protection gap of 95%, which means that 95% of the people in India who need insurance protection don't have any insurance protection or don't have adequate insurance protection. Right? So that's a very it's not just sizable in terms of a market, but that's a lot of families in India today who are just maybe one tragedy away from financial distress. So for us, really, it was about how do we get, how do we stay true to ourselves, our identity, and make ourselves more relatable and accessible for them. So one,
So when you wanted to do this, you had several stakeholders where you had to build the brand, right? So normally when you think of marketing, you only think of campaigns and logos and brands, but you in this case you have the agents, you've got the distributors, you've got bank assurance partners. So the way you do branding would be very, very different, or rebranding would be very different. So what is the approach that you took?
I think we were very fortunate, right, in our transition. On the one hand, as a fully digital business, which is what we were known as before when we were Avon Life, a lot of our distribution at that point was managed through our distribution partners. So we didn't really have a very strong retail physical presence. Right? So that made things like the transition, the number of touch points that we had really were mostly digital, and digital touch points were easy to kind of switch over. But once we actually transitioned into Bandhan Life today, we've started to build out our retail presence all across the country. So today we are present in about more than 1,700 branches of Bandhan Bank, spread all over the country, and that number will continue to grow up. So in that sense, I would say, as far as brand transitions go, this was, we were fortunate to do it from a lot of businesses go the other way. They want to shift from, being brick
Yeah,
and mortar
correct.
to click and mortar. In our case, we said, okay, fine. The customer we're serving is really someone who needs a physical interaction. right? They lead an advisory cell. So how do we ensure that we are present physically, at that moment of truth when they're trying to make a decision, and really we've been building out our presence on there.
So, as you build this brand, what are the differences that you're seeing in the marketing techniques for a financial services brand versus, say, what you would do for a consumer marketing brand? Do you see differences? Are there any learnings that you are able to see?
So I think at least for the financial services sector as a category, I think we've been witnessing a seismic shift, and that shift has been driven by digital adoption and the fact that consumers' expectations are also evolving. Right, other categories have kind of evolved very rapidly, and now those same expectations are being ported by the customer, has those same expectations even for for their existing categories, especially something like financial services. What we realized, for example, is that today customers don't want hard sell insurance pitches. They want transparency, they want simplicity, and they want convenience, right? So our marketing strategy isn't just about pushing a product; it's about how can we remove friction from the buying process. Right? So I was talking earlier about the fact that traditionally insurance has always required a lot of paperwork. So how with the what we were asking ourselves is that, okay, if no one wants to deal with endless paperwork, can we make our onboarding consent based using digital tools like KYC, right? So that we can eliminate a lot of cumbersome documentation. The other thing was that we know that for life insurance there is a fair degree of skepticism, right? So people don't necessarily understand why they need it, if they're not very comfortable about the idea of putting money into a financial product that doesn't give them something back in their own lifetime, right, while they're alive. So there is some amount of skepticism, but the way to address that really is to kind of talk about the high claim settlement ratios, to use customer testimonials. All of these things are kind of play a pivotal role in conversion. The other thing is, for a product category that is relatively complex, right? For customers, they need to understand what they're buying, and you need to address the idea of potential mis-selling, right? Which can happen sometimes, when it comes to financial services. How can you build trust now? Whether you're using chatbots that are AI powered, right, because they allow you to scale depending on the number of customers you have, whether you use new media formats like short explainer videos, whether you kind of invest in any content that helps build up financial literacy so that customers can make more informed decisions. I think really these are the things that financial services players really need to do, right? So really the future for me is at least as far as marketing is more of this. It's not just about the fact that shifting budgets to digital mediums, because I think that's how some people kind of see it. It's more about fundamentally just rethinking how financial products are discovered, how they evaluated, and how are they purchased.
So one question that I have as I hear what you're talking is the traditional view of insurance is you're selling to a salaried class, which means that every month I get a certain amount of salary, and therefore I know when I can pay my premiums. But when you're talking to and targeting, say, the self-employed, the challenge that you have there is I'm not very sure about what I'm going to earn next month. Okay, and maybe last year my business was great, this year my business is not good. So this predictable premium payments, okay, may not appeal to to this class. So therefore product innovation may be something that's key, and I don't see too much of product innovation happening in the insurance industry. Is that something that you get involved discussing with your product folks, with your management? So because if you want to earn a seat on the table with the leadership, your ability to not just communicate but also develop products become very important in a category like this.
So I think for any category, whether it's financial services or otherwise, for marketing to play a more instrumental role, it has to fundamentally understand who the consumer is and how the business operates. Right? So, for example, when we were talking about self-employed, we knew that their incomes can fluctuate. So they don't. For them, making rigid monthly premiums, that can be a hurdle. So, instead of expecting them to fit into existing models, you just need to create slightly more flexible payment structures. Right? You have to allow things like, okay, fine, you can do one-time payment of premium, right? Or you can pay once in 6 months or once a year. But you just need to add that flexibility in. When you looked at a category like homemakers, right? Today, if you think about it, the economic value that a homemaker has is immense. She runs the household. If it usually is a woman, so she runs the household. She takes care of the kids. Very often, they are also taking care of elderly dependents in the family. What happens if a homemaker is suddenly not there tomorrow, right? Homemaker is actually doing several jobs, right? And has several responsibilities, and that cannot be replaced so easily. So they have tremendous economic value to the household, right? But they are almost never covered by insurance. So when we were looking at it, we said, why should we just frame insurance the traditional way? We need to reframe life insurance as protection for the financial stability of the household, not just for the primary earner. Right? So really, it's about bringing that understanding, right, into the boardroom to say, okay, fine, these are where opportunities lie. And of course, you have to work with your product teams, right? You have to work with the actuarial teams, with the finance teams to say, okay, fine, how addressable is this market? How much, how can we size it? How can we package it? How can we market? How can we sell it? So, how much time does it take for us to kind of get our ROI from this investment? Those are conversations that you need to have, and you have to be comfortable having those conversations before that product even hits the market.
So the other thing that I see also is typically, marketing folks are in their own. They're comfortable within their own community, but in an organization, your ability to collaborate with functions, which could be customer service, which could be actuarial in your case. Do you think marketing needs to expand its view on working with functions and collaborate unlike before?
So I have this theory that people, when they try to look at when they consider marketing and what marketers do, right? We tend to focus a lot on individual brilliance within marketing. Right? We say, okay, fine, this CMO is responsible for running this campaign, or this brand has great ads, great communication. But for me, really successful brand building and marketing, it's a team sport. Right? So think of it like, the analogy that I like to use is, Formula One. If anybody who follows Formula One, right? Think of the marketer or the CMO as being the driver, right? The one who sits in the car. But without the pit crew, you need creative teams, you need data scientists, you need people with financial acumen, you need CX strategists, you need product experts. So that's your pit crew, right? You need the team boss, the CEO, the team principal, right? Without all of these things working in conjunction, the car goes nowhere, right? Look at one of the most successful drivers in Formula One was a gentleman by the name of Michael Schumacher, right? What made Michael Schumacher great wasn't just the fact that he was a great driver. He spent hours of his time before and after the race with his engineers, just refining every single element of the car, right? And good marketers need to be able to do that. The car is your brand. That's what people see going around the track. That's what people buy, right? But in order for that car to go around and for that car to win, you need a team, not just of marketers, but it has to be cross-functional across the organization to be able to say that this is how we get our brand to do really, really well in a competitive environment. So for us, we knew we know, for example, that at Bandhan Life, bank assurance is really a key channel for us. So our marketing today can drive awareness, but that awareness can only take you so far. You also at the same time need to make sure that your bank relationship managers, they're trained effectively, right? Because if they are not trained, they will not be able to sell convincingly. Your conversion is going to suffer. So when we think of marketing, we're also thinking not just on ads. We're thinking about, okay, fine, how can we improve trading collateral, right? How can we ensure that we're looking at interactions beyond just say clicks and walk-ins, but really what is the quality of the interaction that's happening? If there is a drop-off, where is that drop-off happening? Why is it happening? And we bring that understanding in. And there are some areas where marketing will take the front seat, right? But there are other areas where it's just going to be a partner providing insight and then letting the experts say, okay, fine, here's the insight. Now, how can we kind of figure out a solution for this challenge?
Very nice. A beautiful analogy. I think it fits in so beautifully, which brings me to my last question, which is really, are agencies prepared for this change?
I think, honestly, if I had to say, look at it from that lens, when we're looking at brands today cannot exist in isolation. They need partners, right? Because you cannot have all expert. Marketing branding is a very diverse field and is getting even more diverse. New technologies are being introduced, new methodologies are being, frameworks are being adopted. So nobody can be an expert in everything. So you do need partners. I think most brand and agency relationships, they really start strong, but they tend to fizzle out, right? And that's because initially you've got you have this shared vision, you have a belief that this partnership is going to really do wonders. But give it about 6 months, 8 months, on that honeymoon phase tends to kind of fade. And there are a number of reasons for this, but the brand eventually begins to think that this agency just doesn't get our customer, doesn't get our product. The agency feels that, oh, this client is really rigid, they're unwilling to explore bold ideas. So eventually what happens is, instead of pushing for a 9 or a 10 out of 10, everybody kind of settles for a 6, right? And a 6 out of 10. And so what you're left with is a lot of work that is very functional, right? But it's uninspiring. I've actually had the opportunity to sit on both sides of that table, right, throughout my career. I think about half of my work has been on the brand side, the other half has been on the agency side. And I've seen where great partnerships thrive, and I've also seen where they break down. On the one hand, I think brands expect that their agencies are going to be fortune tellers. Marketing today is the kind of field that is evolving so fast, it's almost like a breakneck speed. Today, we're in the age of generative AI, so we're talking about AI-driven ads. We have new social platforms that are kind of mushrooming. We see consumer behavior that's kind of changing as new platforms become available. And for brands are kind of pressuring. They want their agencies to kind of master these things overnight, and they expect that often without providing, very clear business context about why is this even important for my, for my business. And so the agencies that actually do well, they're not just interpreting a trend. The agencies who do well here are the ones who are able to get, inside access to the company's insights, to the customer's pain points, and to the company's strategic priorities. Only when they are able to do that, when they have that partnership, can they create meaningful work. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that agencies also feel that brands do not appreciate the chaos that they are dealing with. If you're an agency today, and as someone who's worked in an agency, you know, right? You're juggling multiple clients. You're constantly pivoting between one industry to another. You're juggling deadlines. You're juggling creative revisions, right? And every client today who's sitting on the other side of the table thinks that their brand should be the priority. But so does every other brand that's on the agency's roster. And what you really need is a partnership mindset, something that where there is the mutual respect for each other, the skills and expertise that they bring to the table, and also for the working styles. Because the way agencies work, it's not the way that brands work, right? I think probably the third area is that on both sides, both brands and agencies, there is a fear of failure. Brands will say that they want really bold innovation, but that only works if that success is going to be guaranteed. On the other hand, agencies say that they want a lot of creative freedom, right? But they're also at the same time fearful that they might lose an account if they push too hard. So this, this brings them sometimes at loggerheads, and it kind of results in a diluted, like a risk-averse, approach to marketing, and that ultimately is going to fall flat with customers. And this is not something that impacts only a few or just the majority, and their exceptions. I think even the greatest brands, have deal with exactly the same things. Like I think one of the seminal stories for me when you read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, right? They talk about Apple has this commercial called 1984, which they published at the Super Bowl, and today it's touted as one of the most legendary ad films ever created. Some publication have said it's the greatest single TV commercial ever created. And everybody looks at that commercial as an example of a brand making bold bets and making bold choices. But what most people don't really know, and what I didn't know before until I read the book, was that Apple almost killed that commercial before it actually went to air. Right? The executives, when they saw it, many of the executives who saw it hated it. They hated it so much that they actually had bought a Super Bowl slot, and they tried to sell it back. They're like, hey, listen, cancel our slot. We cannot run this commercial. Right? And it really took a few people, right? On the one hand, the agency, at that point, I think Chai Tay was the agency, they kind of held their ground.
Yeah.
Right? They held their ground. They were asked to give the slot back. They didn't. Right? They held on to it. And in between, you had a few executives. Steve Wozniak, who was the co-founder with Steve Jobs, he loved the ad so much. He said, you know what, I am going to fund it out of my own personal money if I have to. Right? So only when they really kind of stood their ground were they able to convince the board. And that time the board only let them run the ad twice. It ran once during the Super Bowl, and it ran one other time just so that it could be eligible for an award. Right? But this thing, the most iconic ad in television history has only been run once, because the brand that ran the ad wasn't confident enough about the ad itself. Right? So this fear of failure is a very real thing. Right? I think the best campaigns kind of come out when both sides kind of co-own the problem. In the case of 1984, really that's what happened, right? You have the agency on the one hand who decides to take the risk and say, listen, we're not going to sell that slot back. Right? And you have, on the other hand, the founders, co-founders, or the executives who say, like, listen, we will take that risk. Even if it's just one thing, but it's 68 million people are going to see this ad. But we will take this risk.
Yeah.
Right? It's a calculated risk. And you fight at the end of the day for a business-driven creative, not just creative for its own sake. Right? It has to be business-driven creative. And when that happens, that's when you have great partnership. Right? Because great partnership is supposed to challenge and elevate the other person, not just yourself. Right? So I think for agencies and brands to kind of go beyond the transactional, instead of just like settling for sixes and not trying to go for a 9 or a 10, they need to start thinking of each other as strategic co-creators. You cannot have a agency vendor and buyer relationship. You have to invest in that relationship and say, okay, fine, I'm going to treat you as someone who you have to be willing to understand what's on the other side of the table. Brands need to understand what agencies go through. Agencies also need to spend time and invest time in what brands are doing. We can't be sitting back and waiting for a brief. Right? Get into the skin of your client's customer. walk in their shoes, and then come out with insight. I heard this really fascinating story of a couple of months ago from a CPG company talking about how they were trying to sell talcum powder. Right? They had called their agencies for a creative briefing, but before they did, it was a very fancy hotel in South Bombay. Before they did, I think the presentation was supposed to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but everybody was called in by 12:30 or 1, and they had arranged this really nice horse-drawn carriage which would go down Marine Drive. Okay, in Mumbai, which is like an iconic balustrade across, in South Mumbai, with sea facing.
Yeah.
And they made them all sit in that horse-drawn carriage, and they all the creative partners kind of went on that. But it was, the height of the afternoon, so you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, fine, I've got this really lovely thing, but it's really bloody hot. And at that point, everybody went through this thing, and it was maybe 20-30 minutes. I don't know exactly how long, but it was long enough that they all reached the hotel and they're all very uncomfortable. Right? I've come for this presentation. I'm meeting executives, very high powered executives at a very large, well known, well regarded brand, but I'm sweating now. I'm wiping my forehead, I'm not feeling very comfortable, it's been a hot summer's day. And at that point, really, the client said, okay, the product that we are selling is talcum powder. The bulk of our customers who use this talcum powder, okay, have to deal with these conditions. Okay, now I want you to come up with how you think this product is going to help my customer. Right? So that point, it was brand orchestrated. But the idea is that, yes, you can't be sitting in an ivory tower and thinking about what the customer meant. You have to walk in their shoes in order to be able to understand, in order to be able to maybe give feedback that the brand says, yeah, this resonates or rings of truth, because this agency understands what my customers face and what my customers go through. So it's about fostering that partnership.
Beautiful. I think the examples were very, very nice. So I'm going to end our conversation with a couple of
Sure.
rapid fire questions. So what's one campaign that you really love and would like that you would have created it?
I think there are several, honestly.
So you can. It's not that you have to say one, but you can say the top 3, top 5. I'm fine.
I would say any campaign that Nike has done in the last 20 years. Right? They have taken what is just a shoe and they've made it a brand about personal triumph. Just Do It, to me, is a phenomenal piece of communication, and I would love to have been associated with it. I think in the Indian context, you take something like what Cred has done, right? They have made campaigns part of their ad campaigns are now part of the cultural lingua franca. Like, it's something people discuss. Have you seen the Cred ad? People anticipate, waiting for the next Cred ad, wondering what they're going to do. Other brands have tried to emulate them. So you will see brands that are now creating ads that look like Cred ads. Right? So in that sense, I think internationally, yes, Nike. Locally, I think Cred does some fantastic work.
If you were to advise an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old marketing student in a university or a college, what would your advice be?
I think if you're going to be if they're considering marketing as a career, I would say, let's look at 3 things. One is, start thinking from day one like a business owner. Don't say that I'm going to be in marketing, so I'm going to think like a marketer. Marketing is not just about ads and content. At the end of the day, it is about growth, it's about revenue, and it's about customer experience. If you want to do well at marketing, don't just focus on the creative side. Learn about financial modeling, learn about pricing strategy, learn about consumer psychology. I think the best marketers today understand their business and their consumer inside out. So that's one. Okay, think more like a business owner. Second piece is that there are so many specializations today. If you're starting out, you need to start thinking about how you're going to develop an unfair advantage. The marketing landscape is incredibly crowded. Everybody knows digital. Everybody understands content, right? What is it that's going to set you apart? Maybe you can develop an expertise in, I don't know, behavioral science. Maybe you're really good at tech, right? So you can start thinking about integrating AI into your marketing workflows. Maybe it's your ability to work with people so you can manage teams better, so you can help teams execute at scale. You need to find that niche, whatever that niche is, and you need to own it. The third thing I would say is never stop experimenting. I think the biggest mistake marketers can make is sticking to what worked yesterday. I think every single major industry shift, whether it was social media, whether it is e-commerce, whether it's short form video, AI, all of this at some point was just dismissed as a fad, right? I think the best marketers, they don't wait to be proven right. They test, they learn, they adapt, and they do this before the rest of the before the rest of the market catches up. If you want to be really good at the field of marketing, really think beyond marketing, right? Understand the consumer, understand the business, and try to kind of figure out where the world is going next.
Great. Brilliant answer, Akhil. What are the one or two books in marketing that you've enjoyed reading and even now going back to them?
So, I think two books that kind of stand out to me is one is uh, on marketing and brand building, the author Byron Sharp, and I like it because he really understands. I mean, he's done a lot of academic research that's grounded in the practical world to understand really what is it that really drives penetration and market share. Really, so that is, I think, essential reading for any marketer. The other book, especially within the Indian context, I don't think it's on my bookshelf. Uh, I think everyone in India, if you're going to be a marketer in India, you should read Lilliput Land by Rababa Japurkar.
Okay.
Right? She is, for those who don't know who Rama Bijapurkar is, she is, a stalwart in the market research or the consumer insights industry. If you want to understand how so much of real India lives, you need to look at that book. It is based on years of data. I think today with marketers, one of the things is that we think we love data. We want dashboards, we want visualizations, and we think that gives us a lot of information. There's this illusion of knowledge. Okay, I think a lot of marketers suffer from this illusion of knowledge. But a book uh, like Lilliput Land will really kind of test your assumptions about who you think your customer is. Right? And I would say definitely look at that, because that will help you become a better marketer. If you understand your customers better, that will really help you.
So, what's one piece of advice? You may have got a lot, but what's one piece of advice that you cherish even today?
I think the one that has worked for me, and I will say works for most people, is that always stay curious. Understand that you may know initially, you don't know a lot, and so it's fine. And curiosity is a natural, it's a natural part of us wanting to learn. But as we kind of grow in our careers, we think we know, right? Experience helps, but at the same point, understand that there is a lot more that you don't know, and especially in a field like ours, like marketing, which is evolving the way that it is. You have to realize that there is a lot more stuff that you don't know than it is that you know. So always be curious, be open-minded. That's really where you'll be able to. Otherwise, you will not be able to spot patterns. Work well with other teams if you're only limited to your own individual silo or function. So yeah, I think always be curious.
And my last question really is, what's one thing you believe in that people whom you work with really don't believe the same perspective that you have, and you find it hard to drill it into them?
I spent about 3 days last week at the Indian School of Business, And I was part of this. I was fortunate enough to be invited to this exercise where there were marketers, senior marketers from a wide variety of categories. They were from FMCG, they were from hospitality, travel, uh, industrial products like glue. So it was a very, very diverse audience. We spent one day understanding the difference between data and insight. As someone who has come from a consumer research background, I spent 5 years in consumer research, so I felt okay, fine, maybe I had a little bit better understanding. But what I found and what I was surprised by, and maybe I should not have been surprised by it, but I think even marketers today, senior marketers, tend to confuse data with insight. I think marketing at the end of the day has always been about understanding people, what they want, what they fear, what moves them to act. Right? Today's brands, they are drowning in data. Okay, but they're completely starved for insight. Right? Most companies today have access to customer analytics, behavioral tracking, predictive modeling, but all that data alone is not insight. Data tells you what people do, insight tells you why they're doing it. Data without the interpretation is just noise. Right? So I think that is something where I would say a lot of, at least newer marketers need to because data is a lot more easily accessible right now. People tend to look at the data and then say this is what data is the truth. Right? Data is only part of the picture. Okay, and for you to get into a more insightful frame of mind, insights don't just emerge. You actually need rituals to cultivate them. I think I was speaking to I met this marketer at a forum, and he said something to me which I thought was very, very interesting. He said, "Insight is a mood. You have to be comfortable with the idea of questioning whatever is coming across your desk or your plate or your dashboard. Don't just look at the what, try to get behind it and understand the why. And it's not the role of one individual. Every person who's working in that business should try to get a better understanding of why. Okay, you may not all be able to go to the same level of depth, but it helps. I'll give you one very small example of how this worked. We had a landing page for an investment product, okay, that we had recently launched. And when we looked at all of the heat maps and the click tracking data, first of all, the first thing we did was when we were creating this landing page, we benchmarked it against competition. We said, okay, fine, what is competition doing well? These are the things that are doing well. Our own experience and data has told us these are the things that customers tend to look for. Let's marry these two things together, come out with this version of this page, this landing page, because it's going to help us convert. We put that page out there. And then when we start looking at the data, we said, yeah, okay, fine. The performance of this page, the conversion is in line with the expected trends. Now, how can we kind of optimize this? Right? So we said, okay, fine. Let's look at the heat maps and the click tracking data and say, where are people not spending any time? What are the parts they're just skimming over or just avoiding? Right? So we looked at all of the data and we said, okay, fine, there are a whole bunch of things that they don't spend time on. Why? Because maybe they think the product is too complex. Maybe that's a second stage or a third stage sort of query. They don't need it in stage one. Maybe I just need them to move further down the funnel. So let's take that out. Okay, let's redesign the page, but let's take out all what we think is extraneous information. When we did that, we were expecting to see better throughput. That didn't happen. In certain cases, it actually went down. But it was counterintuitive for us. So we said, okay, fine, we need to figure out what this is. We can go back to, the same older version of the page, but then there's no insight there, right? So we said, let's start listening to all of the calls that are coming in. So just imagine the people who are dropping out, we had no way to contact them. Right? They had not even left a phone number. So we said, let's start listening to all of the calls of the people who actually have moved down further down the chain, and just understand what are the questions that they're asking. So there were 100 questions that typically come in. We just stack ranked and said these are the top 5 most repeated, like an FAQs, but actually asked by the customer speaking to an agent. And we said, what if I just take those 5 questions And if I put them and if I package them nicely and I make them, in a format that's more relatable, that sounds like an individual is talking to you. If I just take those five questions out of, like, say, maybe 100 calls, and I put that back on the page, what happens? When we did that, all of a sudden we saw that our conversions began to really improve within a very short period of time. I mean, we are talking about, like, a couple of 2 to 3 weeks, right? And to me, really, that is just illustrative of the what tends to happen. Data can give you part of the picture, cannot fill in everything. It can lead you to different hypotheses. Okay, some of which might work, but if they work, you don't even know why they're working. You're making an assumption, right? So it's always important to kind of go back and question and understand the why. So I would say to most marketers out there, we are all of us today very fortunate that we live in a world where data is so easily available. But that doesn't mean that we need to be disconnected from actually the insight. And inciting is a mood, right? It's a habit. It's a daily ritual, right? And it's something you need to inculcate
Beautiful.
in every member of your team, right? And other teams as well. It's not like, okay, fine, only marketers have access to data and should look at it. Finance guys have access to data. Product teams have access to data. Customer experience guys, customer service, everyone has access. It's at our fingertips. We should just try to take advantage by asking the why behind it.
Beautiful. So thanks a ton, Akhil. I really found your answers very thoughtful. It was in depth. There's a lot of passion with which you really went through the thought process and came back with deep answers. So not often I see many marketers do that. So it's a lovely conversation. A lot of things that I learned, and I'm sure our audience is going to find it extremely valuable. And I believe this can be an extremely beautiful episode for anybody who wants to understand and practice the art of marketing.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
a
Sabu. It
lot.
was great having this conversation. I really appreciate you having me on this show.